Wherever you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls of the planet and beyond to Paranormal Now. I'm Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Joining me tonight to discuss his new book, President Eisenhower's Close Encounters, is Paul Blake Smith. This will be a great conversation for those who are interested in history as well as ufology. Call-in lines will be open tonight in the last 30 minutes. And of course, please share your thoughts and experiences with us during or after the show on Facebook. That's facebook.com/Paranormal Now Radio, Twitter @Paranormal_Now, and on Instagram @Paranormal Now. And to all our friends out there who have been following this show, you are familiar with the Ufo Monument Park in Sheffield, Massachusetts. And I want to encourage all of our new listeners, if you get a chance to go out there and check out the park. It's a great idea for a day trip. And again, I just love that this is a place for reflection rather than selling products and putting on, conferences. It's a place that, really instills the idea of the mystery behind these phenomena and these encounters, rather than, going and buying posters and getting signatures at symposiums, which I love to do. But, there's just nothing like taking a moment to really reflect on site with some of the biggest cases out there. All right. So tonight, again, the open lines are open. If you want to call in, that number is 85-KGRA Live or 855-472-5483 for the Paranormal Radio app lines. We're having a little bit of a delay with the lines, but Bill Skywatcher will be on it. So if you call in, just give him and myself a little time just to get you on the air, but we are looking for your calls. And as always, I appreciate your feedback. I really love to hear your insights, and you come up with really brilliant questions for guests at times. So I truly appreciate it when you pose an important or even challenging question for our guest, because that helps all of us learn. And there's so many of you out there just so much about these subjects, whether it's ufology or cryptozoology, metaphysics. It's like we just have it covered. There's so many smart people out there. So thank you, everyone, every week for tuning in. I do appreciate that. Paul Blake Smith, in his book, President Eisenhower's Close Encounters, takes a close look at the serious clues and claims that a sitting U.S. president actually met in private with friendly, landed, human-like alien beings in February of 1954. It's one of the most exciting stories in UFO ET history, and yet no one has ever produced a single book on the subject until now. And if you would like to find out more about Paul's work, you can find him on Twitter @PBSSmith18. Paul, welcome to Paranormal Now. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. So it's interesting. Why wouldn't anyone write a book on this subject?
You would think so. I was astonished, and I waited for not only years, but like decades. You would see it mentioned on Ancient Aliens on the History Channel for about 2 minutes, or on MUFON Hangar 1. They did a piece on it, about 2 minutes. Or something like Alien Files Decoded or Declassified, something like that. I think they did a full half hour, but they don't give you much detail. And I thought, well, this is just a super story. Who wouldn't want to learn more about this? And so I waited and thought, well, I'll just write it myself. And I've been researching it for quite a long time in fits and starts since the 90s. And I've accumulated a lot of information. I try to pack it into my book and make sure the reader gets his money's worth.
And it is always a side note, isn't it? It's that thing that people talk about, but we're not going to really entertain it and take it seriously. Why should we take it seriously?
I would have had the same opinion when I first heard it myself, because it came out originally for the American public in the 50s briefly. on the Frank Edwards Mutual Broadcasting System program, shortly after which Frank Edwards was fired. And there's been a lot of rumor and data around that one of the reasons why he was canned back in the 50s was because he talked about this UFO case. But in the 1980s, it came out in the National Enquirer, and it was written, a pretty well-written article by Derry Matera. So that was one of the first people I looked up and contacted him. And I said, do you have anything new about this story? And he said he did not. But he's not retracting anything. He's not going to, say, well, this was made up or exaggerated. He stuck by the story. And the story back then, he consulted the late Alan Hynek, Dr. Hynek of the UFO fame. And Hynek expressed real interest and that he had a bit of a file on the Eisenhower encounter with aliens at Edwards Air Force Base. So he developed a story, Mr. Matera, from there. And the story was picked up and run in various syndicated newspapers at the time. It does sound a little over the top. Eisenhower snuck away from the media and the public to go out to an Edwards Air Force Base runway and meet friendly aliens? Come on. But the more I looked into it, the more data I compiled, I believe that the story really is true and really did happen and might have had a follow-up the year after, in February 55. If you've ever read the very fine research of the late Art Campbell, who put together a website and all sorts of clues and stories that have been picked up on by some other people, that Eisenhower arrived at Holloman Air Force Base and extraterrestrial craft seemed to come down. One came down and landed near his plane and another one hovered overhead. And that might have been the conclusion of an agreement that Eisenhower reached from the year before when he met these friendly human-like beings and had a conversation with them in the desert late at night.
Why friendly?
Well, I don't think Eisenhower would have been allowed to go if Air Force officials assessed the situation as in any way dangerous. It would have been just really ludicrous to believe that he had no prior knowledge of this landing, that I believe the whole trip for him to fly out to Palm Springs, California in February of 54 was a pretext. Eisenhower was a master strategist. That's what the U.S. Army utilized him for in World War II, to put together different components of the Allied effort in Europe to defeat the Nazis. And he was extremely smart, knew how to strategize and plot secret battle plans and logistics. And I believe they utilized that kind of method again to have him fly out for a so-called golf vacation, which was over 2,000 miles from the White House. Pretty flimsy excuse when you think in hindsight. Eisenhower golfed almost obsessively just down the coast in Augusta, Georgia, where the Masters golf tournament is played. He played there dozens and dozens of times, so many times they built him a house on the fairway down there. And so if he was so interested in playing golf only, why didn't he just go down to Augusta? So he went out to Palm Springs, and it was just a short flight on Friday, February 19th, 1954, to go out to Edwards Air Force Base, where he was given the go-ahead ahead of time by Air Force officials that these 5 craft came down. Apparently, the description of them by a couple of different people was that 3 were circular and 2 were elongated or cigar-shaped. And they landed. They got a very unfriendly greeting when they first came down. And then the aliens stepped out and presented themselves and spoke in English. They were unarmed and they apparently exuded friendliness. I'm sure that the Air Force checked them out pretty thoroughly before telling Eisenhower, it's all clear, you can come in, nothing bad's going to happen. And when Eisenhower did, he still made sure to bring an entourage of about 6 bodyguards who surrounded him, according to an eyewitness who spoke up a few decades later.
How do you check out aliens, though? I mean, we're not talking about like an adversary or another country where maybe we have spies or we have some intelligence on. It's not like you can do a background check, right? On extraterrestrials.
Right. I believe the story is that they offered to allow Air Force officials to go and inspect the inside of their craft. Whether this was done, I honestly don't know. Maybe the braver ones among the Air Force did, and maybe they even patted them down. I don't know, but the aliens were not your typical 3-foot big black-eyed grays. They were humanoid or very human-like. I call them in my book basically cousins of human beings. They looked alike, but there were a few differences according to an eyewitness at the scene, the one who spoke up around 1982.
Was their skin color gray or something that we've heard of before?
The eyewitness didn't say. However, have you ever seen the Army Manual 101, an intelligence operation manual on how to deal with aircraft by the Army? Mm-hmm. They give a description of an alien very much like that. Human, very short, fuzzy type hair at the top, very little of it on their heads, but somewhat grayish or maybe grayish yellow skin tone, and that they could almost pass as you and I. So I believe since that manual was dated April of 54, a few months after the Eisenhower encounter, that may be a description of what came down at Edwards Air Force Base.
Now, why couldn't it have been his 2-week vacation? I mean, don't we have some historical precedents for why he would be doing that were more earthly in relations?
Are you referring to like Mr. Eisenhower? Everyone knew loved golf. So that gave him an excuse that there were a lot of, or just really 2 or 3 country clubs built in the desert of Palm Springs. His host was a man named Paul Hoffman. Hoffman lived in Pasadena. Why didn't they bring Eisenhower into Pasadena? For some reason, Hoffman just had to go out to Palm Springs and rent a house, and that turned out to be not good enough. And another man had to host Eisenhower at the Smoke Tree Ranch in Palm Springs, where he could go golfing every day, and it would look very innocent. So that was the pretext, so that Eisenhower would be able to sneak out one night, which I found out was during a big party at a hotel for the media. That was, I feel, the distraction. That Eisenhower could duck out of town and take a flight out to Edwards while the media was boozing it up and having a good time at this El Mirador Hotel in Palm Springs. It's interesting to know that Art Campbell, the researcher who put together the 55 Eisenhower encounter at Holloman Air Force Base, said the same thing. There was a party going on that distracted the media that day, and Eisenhower was able to slip away. I believe that was their MO, their method of operation, to get Eisenhower under the weather or under the radar and out to a meeting where he would not be discovered. So again, Eisenhower was the master strategist and knew how to distract the enemy. And in this case, I guess the media was the enemy.
Well, but could he not have been discussing other, considering this time period, right? I mean, there's a lot of conflict and, seeking of peace and resolution. So why wouldn't he be going to maybe discuss, some other affairs between countries at the time? And he just wanted to secretively get away so that people didn't know he was having these meetings with whomever.
Yeah. This was the start of the second year of the Eisenhower administration. In his first year, he ended the Korean War and brought all the troops home. We were not at war, and I've read a couple of historians describe 1954 as the boringest, most uneventful year in American history. The economy was doing well. Yes, there was a Cold War going on, but for Eisenhower to go out all the way to Palm Springs and play golf, there really was no other dignitary out there, certainly no one from another country. I did find that Walter Winchell wrote some newspaper columns, and in reading them, he said he encountered in Palm Springs during Ike's vacation an exact duplicate or a look-alike. And you can't tell me that this is just a coincidence. The man's name was Chester Miller. He was a New York City filmmaker, and he just happened to show up in Palm Springs at the exact time of Eisenhower. I think that might have been part of a particular plan to distract people or have him play golf maybe during the day, and you wouldn't really know the difference. Winchell described this man as the same exact height, same bald head, same crooked grin, same build. I mean, that just can't be a coincidence that this man was in town. So I think that was part of the general operation. And I think it's possible that if Eisenhower wanted to, he could have sent this guy out onto the tarmac at Edwards Air Base as him. I don't think he did that, but that might have been a contingency plan to send a duplicate. It's interesting to know that some world leaders during World War II used body doubles, including Hitler and Montgomery, the British commander. He, an exact double who was so convincing during World War II, there were plans by the Nazis to assassinate the double. They had no idea it was a lookalike. So that's just one example of some funny business going on, I found out.
What? But why send the double exactly? For safety?
Just in case something went wrong, or it's simply speculation on my part. I'll admit I don't have documented evidence. But if they wanted to send out someone at first to talk to the aliens and not risk the president's life, I don't believe that was done. But it might have been a plan B, plan C, something thrown out there. Or he might have been, Chester Miller might have simply been in Palm Springs to throw off the public and the media to let them think that Eisenhower was in town when he was not.
Yeah, I think if I were Eisenhower, of course, I would be concerned for my safety, right? But with such a sensitive matter, interplanetary liaison or what have you, wouldn't you want to be the one to communicate? Now, so would his double have had maybe, I don't know what tech they had then, maybe an earpiece or something where he could communicate on behalf of Eisenhower? Because I would think Eisenhower would want to, speak for himself and not have anyone be a liaison.
Yeah, I believe that is correct. I agree. I haven't found any evidence so far that the double was used in communication with the extraterrestrials, that it really was Eisenhower in person. He was a pretty bold man, pretty courageous. They asked to meet him, and he agreed. And I used to think, he was just golfing, and the aliens landed, and it was all impromptu. But no, this was set up in advance. There's a congressman by the name of Henry McElroy of New Hampshire who made a somewhat famous video, famous now, back in 2010, I believe it was. And he said, I happened to get my hands on some government files from the U.S. Army, and it said there was a communications program going on between the government, the military, and some friendly extraterrestrials. And it said Eisenhower was notified, kept abreast of this, and that he was recommended by the military to go ahead and meet these friendly beings in person. And you can look this up on YouTube. Congressman McElroy's statement is that he said, it is my understanding that Eisenhower went for it and did go and meet the aliens. Now, why would a congressman risk his entire reputation, his professional career, with a wild made-up story, or even something that was semi-true,
And what was the congressman's name again?
Henry McElroy.
Henry McElroy. Okay. And there's a record of this, right?
Well, he made a video and went on camera, and it caused a stir at the time and for years afterwards, where he said, I read the papers, I saw the file, and it said Eisenhower, it was recommended that he go for this. And the congressman said it was my understanding that Eisenhower did. And I believe that is the result of the Edwards Air Force encounter.
Okay, so was this a first meeting? Was this a reaching out of a hand? Or was this a warning from these aliens? What was the intent behind the meeting?
A couple of things. First, the extraterrestrials spoke in English and said, we'd like to open up a educational program for the people of Earth to let them know they're not alone. There are other beings. Some are more advanced, some are less advanced, and some are friendly, and maybe others are not so friendly. But that they wanted to make their presence known and enlighten humanity. That was the first thing. Mm-hmm. And Eisenhower was not too keen on that. The second thing, is they apparently dispensed a little bit of a lecture to Eisenhower about the way we're treating the planet, the land, the sea, and the air. And the biggest factor of all were these atomic test detonations going on. Eisenhower had a plan, and he was executing a plan called the Castle Program. And that was to detonate enormous atomic bombs in the air, the land, the sea. A big one was supposed to go off in just a few days after the Eisenhower encounter with aliens. That may have been a huge factor from the extraterrestrial point of view. Supposedly, they asked him, please don't set off these detonations. They're poisoning the atmosphere, the land and the sea, and they're punching up into the upper atmosphere. And I go into the explanation for that in my book, that Castle Bravo was detonated anyway, March 1st of 1954, and it was an enormous catastrophe, far worse than anyone expected. There was nuclear fallout, and the world became pretty angry at Eisenhower for having approved this, and at the scientists who didn't think it was going to be so bad. They could manage this. Well, unfortunately, it was just a huge miscalculation, many times more devastating in the South Pacific than what was thought. And I'm thinking, did extraterrestrials know this? Did they realize in advance this was going to be a nightmare? And we're trying to warn him? It's a fairly reasonable assumption.
Do you believe this, or are you standing back from as a more objective researcher and not taking a side on it?
I come from a fairly cynical family, and I can be a little cynical myself. But after years of research and all the different people who chimed in that they've either heard this or seen a little file, there's even one or two sources that say they've seen film footage of the Eisenhower alien encounter, that some of it was in black and white, some of it was in color, and one of the film cameras actually broke down because of the high-tech clash of the alien spacecraft. Maybe it got too close. As we discussed just before we came on the air, there's a new independent film by Chris Munch, I recommend it to everyone, called The 11th Green. And in the artwork, they show Eisenhower meeting with these human-like aliens, and there's a man with a film camera recording it for posterity. So I believe Mr. Munch also discovered this aspect of the communication process. It was actually just inside a hangar on the edge of a runway. The extraterrestrials landed just outside. It was a calm night, and everyone tried to play it cool. Everyone had to be on the human side, just really excited inside, scared, but, they were making history. Your guts had to have been turning a little bit. But after a while, I think they realized there's not going to be any problems or any attack. This was not a Trojan horse. The aliens were not going to whip out some weapons and fire. They were offering education and put on a few displays, which we could get into, too.
All right. So after this first meeting, when he actually met the aliens, how did this affect the future of not only the United States, but also of the planet Earth? Because this is a huge step, and for so many of us to not really know, for there to be no, release of information as to what that conversation really was. There's no freedom of information documents that that say this is exactly what was said, and it still be despite your work being called into question, whether this is actually real, right? I mean, for a lot of people, this is on the fringe of conspiracy theory, and you're making the case that it's not. But if it did happen, the impact of this must have been huge on our societies in ways that we're simply unaware of. So there's a lot to unpack on the other side of this first break. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. We are with Paul Blake, and we are talking about President Eisenhower's meeting with extraterrestrials. This is Alan B. Smith. Stand by. We'll see you on the flip side.
On and again, the signs keep on coming, they point to the end, but I hold on so tight.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRAradio.com.
Lost in a bad way, I've gotta let you go. You're supposed to be so close to me, I'm mostly that ghost to me, yeah. And if you chose to see the most of me, you'd hold.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your most grateful host, and taking us out of the break was music by Septembrio. If you like tonight's bumper music, to find out more about Septembrio, just go to Septembrio, spelled with a Y.com. And of course, as a friendly reminder, if you want to keep up with the best in alternative news, ufology, cryptozoology, metaphysics, spirituality, alternate realms, then The Telepath is the best paranormal news. You can go to kgradb.com, our new website. That's kgradb.com, and you can sign up for The Telepath. Subscribe for that weekly newsletter. And yeah, so I'm really excited. For those of you who haven't seen the new website for KGRA, it looks amazing. So special thanks to Eric Brager for making that happen and really pulling it together. It's really a step up, and I think everyone's been super excited about it. Just the look is it's today. So if you want to find out more about The Telepath, go to kgradb.com. And then in the last 30 minutes tonight, we will open up the call-in lines. The Paranormal Radio app line is 855-472-5483. That's 85-KGRA Live. So, Paul, did Eisenhower have any belief in extraterrestrials before this happened? Do we have any sense, any records of him having any interest in the subject matter?
I go to often www.majesticdocuments.com, which goes through leaked UFO documents and the ones that are more believable and reasonable, that look like they really are real. And there's the occasional mention of Eisenhower, who was Harry Truman's Army Chief of Staff just after the war, and he would have been in place, let's say, for the Roswell, New Mexico event, and he would have had access to Army intelligent files, the most juicy stuff. And I believe, as I show in my book, that he knew that we were being visited before he took office. And there's a story from the New York Post in 1997 that said, a man who wrote this article for the paper said, I was stationed aboard the USS Franklin Roosevelt, stationed off the coast of France. I think it was in the English Channel, and said, we were experiencing a terrible storm one night with lightning and thunder and rolling waves, and on board was General Eisenhower. He came up from below decks and couldn't sleep and asked for a cup of coffee. And as we were talking on the bridge, we saw this circular silver craft, this disc, hovering in the sky just over our heads and right nearby, and it was unaffected by the lightning and the wind. It just sat there. And he said this went on for 10 full minutes, not a few seconds. the lightning would flash and they could clearly see it. And after they were finally finished with this sighting, and it took off, I guess, the craft didn't do anything but just sit there in the sky. President Eisenhower said, I'll look into this, boys, but for now, you better keep this under your hats. And he went back below decks, and they never heard from him again on that matter. So Eisenhower, if the story is true, may well have had a UFO encounter, a very clear one and very sustained one, in January of 52 before he took office in January of 53. So that's an example of, there's a couple other smaller stories I put in my book that he had knowledge that we are being visited before he took office.
Were there more than one occasions where he took a large amount of time off besides this one time?
Not really. As I've said, he seemed obsessed with going to play golf in Augusta, Georgia. And one smart aleck said, I suggest we get Ben Hogan for president. If we're going to have a golfer as the chief executive, we might as well get a good one. The president just took off to play golf whenever he felt like it, but almost always on the East Coast, where it would be a short trip back to and from Washington. So as far as a sustained time off of great mystery, probably not, other than that 1954 or 55 rather trip out to Holloman Air Force Base, which you can look up under Art Campbell's research online.
All right, so I guess you can say he was primed for this kind of encounter then. And surely most people, even civilians, were aware of reports of flying saucers and the possibility of extraterrestrial life visiting. I mean, people were even considering perhaps they were coming from Mars, right?
Right.
Seriously, in some scientific communities. We know better now. So let's just say, okay, let's just say this happened. He goes there, he talks to them, and I have the same sentiment as one of our listeners in the chat. Carolina says, our world is being burned to the ground and everything is being shut down, but the good aliens are looking after us. And that's said with a little sarcasm, right? And there is that thought, like, if they're going to come and talk to us, what are they saying to us if they're benevolent? And yet we still continue on a warring, or I shouldn't even say warring, I should say kind of a bipolar species, right? I mean, one day we're warring, one day we're looking for peace.
Right.
So what did they say to him that would lead him to believe that they are indeed benevolent?
Okay, there's a U.S. Air Force test pilot who wished to remain anonymous, and I just give him the name Jerry in my book. Mm-hmm. He came forward around 1982 and said, the story is true. I was one of the 6 bodyguards that was there with President Eisenhower. The aliens spoke in English, and they displayed 2 things that made Eisenhower very uncomfortable. First, they showed off what their spacecraft can do, lifting up and zipping about in the sky and flitting around silently and then setting back down quietly. I believe they had little tripod legs when they sat down on the tarmac, and they far outstripped anything our jets and our helicopters and such at the time could do. And second, they put on another display that really rattled and upset President Eisenhower. They either cloaked themselves or just made their molecular structure disappear from view and then reappeared apparently in other places, and showed that they have a master of either cloaking or their atomic makeup, that they can mentally teleport themselves. And Eisenhower said, we can't have this. Our world is not ready for this. You're going to have to go. This would cause a panic if people saw this in our skies, if you landed in our cities or even out in a small town. Mm-hmm. There would be chaos, and he did not want to be the president who saw the end of the stock market and the society as we know it. He asked them to please remain aloof, stay away. If you have to stay here and monitor or observe us, please do from a distance. And I think that's basically what has happened ever since. that he came to an agreement with them that if you must look us over, try to do so in remote settings and put us back where we belong. And there's a video with a man named Don Phillips who works for Skunk Works. And he said, I got a hold of a file that described the alien encounter with Dwight Eisenhower. He said the story's true. And Eisenhower told him, how can we stop you? You're so advanced. You're going to do whatever you want to do. He almost had to beg or plead with him. Please don't be showing yourself in our society like this. And I think that's basically what they've done ever since. We see UFO sightings. They flit about very quickly. We don't have hardly any landing stories or encounters. And I think Eisenhower reached an agreement with them. And that's why the whole thing was managed to keep basically covered up and did not have a huge impact on society since the 50s. It was all a big secret. The reason this Air Force pilot spoke up in around 1982 is he said, I've learned that all the others at the encounter have died, and I don't want this amazing story to die out too, so I'm telling it to you. And that came out in the National Enquirer story. I know the Enquirer back then was not always the most strong, acceptable bastion of truth, but in this case, they provided a number of sources, and I tried to include that in my book, that it looks like all these various people said it's true or heard that it was true or even saw. There's one man who claims he saw some images while working at the Pentagon, according to his widow anyway. So I tried to make a really good circumstantial case that would convince you. If you think it's a little out there, I understand. Again, I come from a rather cynical family, a rather disbelieving source. And I went through 4 years of college and learned about reporting and editing and how you need more than one source, et cetera. And I still believe that it probably did happen.
I got a message, and it says, in regard to Eisenhower, making good on his campaign promise, and with the reluctant approval of President Truman, President-elect Eisenhower made an unannounced trip to Korea on December 2nd, 1952. He spent 3 days on the front lines. He conferred with commanders, ate meals with the troops, watched an artillery duel through field glasses, and visited an army surgical hospital where wounded soldiers were being treated. He flew along the battle line, roughly the 38th parallel, in military observation plane, and so on and so forth. Covered and bristling with dug-in Chinese troops and gun emplacements. It reminded him of Tunisia. So on December 2nd, 1952, did that happen?
Yes, there's an interesting story on that. Eisenhower and his media people, like his press agent, holed up at his house after he won the election and said in New York City, I'm going to be interviewing candidates for my cabinet. And he would be very busy doing this and probably out of sight of the press. And candidates for his cabinet, dignitaries like Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles, showed up at his house. But it turns out that was a lie. Eisenhower took a plane and flew across country. Then he flew to Korea and really did meet face-to-face with these people to see the situation on the ground and see the aircraft in Korea. It's an excellent example of something he talked about in a speech, which you can also see on YouTube. He said, I'm from Abilene, Kansas, and we had a code we lived by. You meet with somebody you might have some differences with face-to-face, and you have a good talk, and you work out your differences. And I think that's what he did. He promised he would go to Korea, and he did, even if he had to lie with a cover story to pull it off, distracting the media, taking off. Does that sound familiar?
It does. And that's what I wonder, how many times, he did such a thing. And if he did it once, let's say, with extraterrestrials, is there any evidence that there was a second meeting?
It's difficult to pin down with solid evidence, but Art Campbell did a good job of showing that Eisenhower flew to Georgia and said, I'm going on a hunting trip. I'll be in and out, and you won't see a lot of me. And he went hunting one night, and the press saw him. And the press spokesman released a statement saying the president has the sniffles. He'll be out of action for a day or two. and the media, you should enjoy this party we're throwing on at a hotel in Georgia. And Art Campbell found out that's when he took a flight, even talked to, I think, a Secret Service agent or a flight attendant on the Columbine, which was the Air Force One of its day. And they said, yes, we flew to Holloman Air Force Base in Georgia, that the sniffle story was a lie. And they met with a landed craft. Eisenhower was seen scooting out of his plane and going up to the alien craft on the tarmac. Art Campbell listed the sources who said they saw this at a distance, including a telephone lineman who was up a pole. And when he saw the spaceship come down, he went scooting down that pole at record speed. But he said he saw the president's plane and two craft, one hovering in midair and one landing. Yeah. But and Eisenhower also went inside the base and gathered people in a base theater. It must have been 200 people. And they said that he talked to them and said, this is national security. You cannot talk about my presence here. We really appreciate it if you keep your mouth shut. And most people did. And he flew back to Georgia in the middle of the night and arrived back at that plantation where he was on his hunting trip and resumed. The media was thoroughly fooled again. They had no clue what was going on. And it's just another example that Eisenhower sure knew how to pull off a kind of strategic military black op, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, much more difficult for a modern day president to pull something like that off. Now, you said that there were things that the aliens said that they had, technologies that the aliens had that scared him. And did you say teleportation?
Well, the fact that they were able to either cloak themselves, become invisible to the naked eye, I guess you would call that technology. I don't know if they utilized a device or they used a mental process in which they were able to control their atomic makeup or put up a shield, or I am at a loss to tell you how precisely they pulled it off. But that is what troubled Eisenhower. Can you imagine not only aliens here trying to give us an educational program, but teaching this to the people of Earth, people disappearing from view and then reappearing somewhere else? It would be a nightmare. We'd have bank robbers and spies and thieves and rapists and people up to no good. It would be an utter catastrophe. And that's another reason why he said, you're going to have to go. We cannot have this.
Well, also, that means they could be in the same room as you and you would have no idea.
I'm afraid so. If you think of it that way, how would we know?
Although I guess we're kind of used to the idea of a god kind of seeing our every move, but that's a different relationship. So I guess that wouldn't really translate. So Eisenhower is scared that if we have this technology, that what the human race would just turn into a chaotic civilization, that we wouldn't be able to rein it in. Because I wonder, was he right or was he wrong? Because, with the advent of all kinds of new technologies, particularly a nuclear bomb. I mean, think about, how quickly our technology had leapt to create such destructive and immensely powerful weaponry. The amount of spying that we can do with modern day technology, the damage we can do with hacking. I wonder, if he lived in today's modern times, would he think, maybe we could manage this somehow? Because
I've thought of that question too. Would we today, in today's world, and I'm still thinking when you boil it down, maybe we're not ready for all of this even yet. Although I've seen television reports, the Army is working on cloaking technology. It is something we've got, and some say we have some form of it. It would be very interesting to know because, we all remember Star Trek, the Prime Directive, and flying around and sometimes cloaking themselves. They want a cloaking device from the Romulans or the Klingons. Well, apparently it may be something that's not so science fiction, and we might see more in the future. But are we really ready for this in today's world? I think Eisenhower probably made the right choice then. And as much as I would like to see contact and an educational program, this may be too much for people even today. We've still got some people who think the world is flat and that some things in the news don't really happen and the virus is not real or something like that. We've still got a ways to go to get people up to code.
I think of it in terms of, if you have, they wouldn't be introducing just one tech. They would be introducing a plethora of high-tech technologies. And I would imagine that as a species, as they developed these technologies, perhaps they are just inherently benevolent. They didn't have to go through the stage 1, stage 2 of sentience that humans will have to go through. But I would imagine that they would have ways to counteract against these technologies. And just like today, what's the trade-off? And I have a hard time accepting the wisdom of one individual for all of humanity, rather than inviting. And maybe he did. Is there more to the story? Did he have a round table of sorts?
Not at the time when he met with him. He was the chief spokesman, and I'm not sure if any other American was allowed to speak or negotiate in any way. He was the top boss. But there is a story, and I included in my book, claiming the aliens offered energy technology that would dwarf our own and be, cheap and affordable and clean in exchange for dropping our nuclear arms, just getting rid of them.
Yeah.
And Eisenhower feared the current energy market and all the involvement that we have in the stock market and companies and how that might be crashing. And he feared that the Russians and Chinese would not be dropping their military arms, their nuclear weapons. And he said, I'm not going to disarm unilaterally and just hope for everyone else to cooperate. So he turned down that deal, too.
Well, it seems to me like, he could have used the extraterrestrials to help implore humanity to make the changes that we need to make as a society, because we are biological beings, and so our behaviors, are built into our structure, our DNA, our RNA, our epigenetics. There's no way, unless we physically and biologically evolve as a species collectively at the same time or over time, however you want, however evolution may work in that regard, and that we are just magically benevolent, we will always have behavioral problems. We will always be susceptible to negative influence, to abuse, to dysfunction, to people who are truly psychotic and do not have emotion and lack empathy. It's part of who we are as a species. So
that's right. Eisenhower saw some of that firsthand when he went to Europe and saw what the Germans did to their own people, the Holocaust. He had to have been aghast at the idea that completely foreign aliens would come and at least look at first friendly. Who knows after a while what they would have done, taking over gradually or by force after a few days or a few months. Another factor is Eisenhower had to have considered the fact that if he had said, yes, we'll allow you in a little limited footstep, a foot in the door. What if other alien races, not so friendly, decided the door's open, come on down? And those would have been like a Pandora's box of horrors coming in. If you let one in, do you have to let a number of them, and some of them not friendly at all? So again, I think he made the right choice in saying, no, let's come to an agreement that you're going to stay away and please don't show yourself and disrupt our society.
Well, that brings up a good point again about the breadth of his knowledge. I mean, what else did he learn from them about other alien species out there? If that were, and that's a very legitimate concern, or could you negotiate? Hey, we'll let you hang out with us. Here's what we want from you, to help us become a better, collective on this planet as a one race. But you got to keep other ones out. Couldn't that have been on the table for negotiation?
I would think so, but it would be conjecture on my part. There were talks, and I'm not sure how many of the aliens were allowed to speak. What if only one alien was allowed to speak, and he didn't really represent the others? That's probably another factor Eisenhower had to consider before he told him beat it in so many words. And I'm sure he had to be very polite. You have to be very congenial. Oh, well, it was nice meeting you. Well, see you in another 100 years or something like that. But it just raises all kinds of questions about what could happen after we let you come in here.
Well, that says something about his constitution. I mean, he's definitely got some chutzpah, He's to tell extraterrestrials to bug off,
In the politest possible way, but yes, he tried to persuade them, don't show up. I think a big factor was the 1937 War of the Worlds broadcast on the radio by Orson Welles. It probably still resonated with some people like Eisenhower who remember that night. I think it was Halloween night, 37.
Yeah.
And supposedly some people panicked. I think the story of panic was a bit overblown, but it was the perception that people panicked and chaos would result, heart attacks, people running in through the streets armed, looking for aliens. If you were to give an address to the nation and tell them, well, aliens have landed and I've met them, and they could come down at any time. There's not much I can do about it. Imagine the chaos that would have triggered. So that was another factor to say, please move along. Nothing to see here.
Hey, Paul, where can people find out more about your work and the book?
I have a website, www.mo41.info. I especially like to hear from friendly folks on Facebook, on President Eisenhower's Close Encounters Facebook page, or my Paul Blake Smith author page. And I also hear from fans on Twitter, LinkedIn. I got a Pinterest page. I admit I don't go there too often.
I feel like that happens to a lot of people with Pinterest.
Yeah. You post the pictures and then you just kind of
forget about it. Yeah.
Well, there are different ways, but I think Facebook is the best way.
All right. Well, that sounds good. Find out more about Blake Smith if you can during this last break of the night, and we'll continue our conversation with Paul on the other side. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. I'll see you on the flip side.
And you are the sky. I need to swim free, and you need to fly. I live for daylight, you live for the night. You love to wander, and I want to be right, but the sweetness in me.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRARadio.com.
I'm a mess, but a hot mess. Learning to love all my indiscretions. I've been going and I don't wanna be found. Go on and I don't wanna be found. I live for the night.
And who doesn't love hanging out and talking about the paranormal and all things strange? I absolutely love doing this every week with all of you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Taking us out of the break was Lizette Xavier. If you want to find out more about her music, go to Lizette Xavier, spelled with an X.com. All right, and in the last 30 minutes tonight, we're going to open up those phone lines, the Paranormal Radio app phone lines. That number is 855-472-5483 or 85-KGRA Live. Paul, what got you interested in this in the first place? In anything ufological, really?
I think I read this story first, a thumbnail sketch of it, in a book in 1985. And I would see little mentions of it, or as I mentioned on Ancient Aliens or MUFON Hangar 1. And I kept thinking, well, this is exciting. When is someone going to produce a book? Maybe a chapter, a full chapter, but you almost never see anything. So I got so determined, I thought I can write this, and I have. The problem is the same the same problem I encountered from my Cape Girardeau 1941 UFO book is that everyone's deceased, and in many cases, their children are deceased. From February of 54, there's almost nobody left. I did get a chance to speak to a woman who had a friend who was there with Eisenhower the next night, Saturday night, the 20th, and that's where we get into the famous dentist story, which turns out to be a non-event, shall we say. Maybe you've heard when you've read of the Eisenhower encounter in other books, they say one night Eisenhower disappeared and was supposedly at the dentist getting his tooth worked on. Mm-hmm. That story was real. He really did have a dental problem. He was at a dinner in Palm Springs. He bit into a duck leg, and it had buckshot in it, and he broke off the crown of his tooth, and he was really irritated, as you might guess. And so the host of the dinner had to call up a local dentist. And the dentist answered the phone and said, yeah, right, the president needs me. And he went back to sleep. So the Eisenhower was taken to the dentist office and was waiting outside for quite a while. And they got really mad and called the dentist back and said, where are you? The president's waiting. And he said, really? And yes, it's quite real. The president had his upper left incisor worked on, Dr. Francis Purcell. That is not a fake story or a cover. It happened the night after the UFO event. So that's one tale I'd like to put to bed for good if I can. The dentist story had nothing to do with Eisenhower slipping out one night. It was the night before.
So the dentist wasn't implanting any communication device, so he had direct contact.
He was not part of the conspiracy whatsoever.
Okay.
He was invited to a cookout at the Palm Springs Smoke Tree Ranch the next night, along with a few celebrities like Bob Hope's wife and Amos and Andy are from the radio or something like that. About 100 guests on Sunday night. And Eisenhower had no choice but to carry on his business as normal. He went to church Sunday morning. He went to play golf and was seen in public barely. Basically, the press was given the general theme. You can take some pictures a little bit, but otherwise leave Ike alone on his vacation. And that allowed him the leeway to sneak out of town once. And after a few more days, nothing seemed to happen. I'm sure he was fielding reports from around the country. Are you seeing anything unusual in our skies? Is there any sort of landing or any UFO sightings? And when there were none, he got on his plane and flew back to Washington, back to business as normal at the White House.
Have you ever had an encounter yourself with anything strange?
No, people wonder this all the time. They tell me there are UFO sightings, but I've never seen anything. UFO, alien, ghost, Elvis, nothing.
What do you think about the ATIP program and the new UFO task force?
I wish them luck. I'm not sure if they have access to a lot of files of what went on decades earlier. I think it was all buried very deeply. Occasionally, little aspects of the Eisenhower contact leak out now and then. I don't know how seriously it's taken within the current inner workings of government, the military, CIA, NSA in particular. But if they want to pay or have taxpayers pay for programs to search for extraterrestrials or hunt down sightings and get the facts, I guess that's harmless. I think it's fairly obvious we are being visited, maybe by a number of races, and they're not going to make contact. It's kind of like that prime directive on Star Trek where you can observe but try not to interact with various races, which Captain Kirk always thumbed his nose at and got involved with other races anyway. But I think that's been basically the MO for the government since the Eisenhower encounter is to be observed, but aliens are not going to make any direct landing on the White House lawn or anywhere else and disrupt our society.
Well, except for this one case, because clearly if they don't have a prime directive, because they asked us, hey,
right,
and what would be their motivation? Why would they come and speak to Eisenhower?
I think they were aghast at the way we are treating the planet. Back in the 40s and 50s, we had smokestack factories just spewing the nastiest filth into the atmosphere, and it came down in rain, and it affected the environment, broke down our ozone layer, pollutants, chlorofluorocarbons, and everything. It had a rebound effect to this day. We're losing our polar ice caps and global warming. It may have been all something that they were observing and knew through scientific testing. This is speculation on my part, but I think that they were able to observe, and that's what they're doing here, that as scientists would here on Earth, a scientific team may get in an airplane, fly to Africa or South America, take samples in the jungle, take flora and fauna, and maybe even examine live animals or dead ones. And then they get back in their plane, they go back to America and write up the reports. Why is it not the same thing for highly intelligent beings from other worlds or other dimensions to come here and observe our fascinating civilization and our wildlife, plants and animals and humans, and how we interact with each other? I think it's a very plausible scenario that we are fascinating. We're a reality show, and it's sometimes a little crazy here.
Yeah, reality shows are hard to turn your eye away from at times.
Right.
So I can see how they relate to that. And like I asked you earlier, why wouldn't Eisenhower have a round table with other dignitaries and leaders around the world? Why wouldn't the extraterrestrials say, hey, so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, we're going to do this meeting and do it all together? Why just Eisenhower? Or, unbeknownst to him, did they possibly make contact with other leaders at the time?
Right. I get that question in other interviews, and I don't know. I suspect it's possible that the human-like alien race landed and spoke to Russians in a remote Soviet Union air base, or maybe China. I have no proof of this, but if they spoke to the Americans, were they talking to others, trying to negotiate a kind of deal to get rid of those nuclear arms and stop poisoning the earth with pollution? It's certainly plausible in my mind.
I have a question from Neutron in chat. Maybe this will make sense to you. When did Eisenhower realize that the rumored deals signed with the Greys were eventually broken?
Well, I don't believe Eisenhower had anything to do with the little gray creatures. However, there's a theory, and I believe it was put forward by Philip Corso. You remember him, of the day after Roswell or something like that. He said that the gray creatures we discovered, the military intelligence people discovered, were like bio-robots created by another race, possibly the human-type race, to do their dirty work basically for them. They have no great emotions or empathy, these little gray things. They might be amongst those who would take a human being and examine them aboard a spaceship and then put them back. And supposedly part of a deal included an agreement that the aliens would tell us the names and dates and places of where they did this, and that this part of the agreement may have gotten broken or was impossible to follow up on. I have no shocking government document that reveals this. However, I'm quite intrigued by a 1989 Defense Intelligence Agency document that was leaked in 2017 to podcaster Heather Wade, and she gave me permission to print some pages of it in the back of my book. And it talks about Eisenhower did meet with aliens and did reach an agreement. And part of that agreement was to have the human-like aliens be able to access a base in the remote Nevada desert to come and go and take their scientific samples and such. Whether there were Greys involved in that, I don't know. And I can't be sure because I'm not allowed out in the walled off or fenced off areas of private property in Nevada, but I do know there's a lot of government land out there. People are not allowed to get too close. And of course, there's the classic Area 51 and S4, and the document might actually be referring to Section 4 or S4 when they talk about alien spacecraft coming and going in private out there. It's a fascinating subject. I'm sure there are other people a little more qualified to talk about that than I.
Okay, thanks for the great question, Neutron. Yeah, obviously these aliens were not grays as we have come to know them. Now, was there any discussion about them coming back in the future, some timeline or date where they would return and be allowed to reveal themselves?
Not that I know of, and knowing that they were rejected by an American president for having an open presence here kind of makes you wonder why they even boldly stepped forward in the first place, other than they are really deeply troubled by the way we're treating our planet. And happily, in some ways, we have cleaned up our act and cleaned up factories and smokestacks and stopped polluting the land and the sea and the air, at least as much as we used to. I don't know if that has anything to do with the Eisenhower encounter and what was agreed upon there, but conditions have gotten better. But we certainly have proliferated the planet with nuclear arms. There's weaponry in so many nations now. And we are, still to this day close to that 1 minute to midnight on the Armageddon countdown, or the nuclear doomsday clock, as they call it. So that situation has not really improved at all, has it?
Right, which I guess begs the question, does it really matter? Maybe it's a gamble, but maybe making contact openly is the best thing for us. Sometimes humans, we need interventions, right? I mean, on a very personal level, that's quite normal. Sometimes it's someone who's in a cult, sometimes it's someone with addiction.
To gently shake someone awake to the awareness of their situation. How serious
somebody with anger management problems, right? I mean, so these are intervention would not. I wouldn't take that off the table completely.
I tend to agree. The aliens kind of gambled and went for it, but I think they overplayed their hand, is the way I put it, and they showed Eisenhower too much.
Okay.
And it really rattled him, according to this eyewitness. So Eisenhower swore everyone to secrecy after the encounter, according to this test pilot who said he was brought along and allowed to watch because he had great knowledge of aerodynamics and flight. Mm-hmm. And the metallic makeup of airplanes and the engines and everything. And he kept his mouth shut until around 82. And I don't believe he ever revealed his name, but I give a possible candidate who this man could have been. I give the name of the Air Base commander, Stanley Holtener, and how he was involved in the Pentagon in years afterwards, and how he could have been someone who might have given the command to open fire. Did I mention that story to you? I'll tell it right now.
Sure.
There was a sergeant who went to a UFO investigator in Los Angeles named Gabriel Green. You may recognize that name. The sergeant said, I was based out at Edwards Air Force Base this past winter when aliens came down in these 5 spaceships. 3 were circular, 2 were elongated, and a general was there. And we were all under his command at the artillery range shooting live ammo at targets. The general saw the spaceships come in and ordered us to turn our weapons on the alien craft. So we did what we were told, he said, and we fired on them, and our explosions, our detonations had no effect whatsoever. He said we stood there stunned until the ceasefire was given, and the craft just came down, slowly wafted over the craft or the base, and landed in front of a hangar in the distance. He said it was astounding. Our weapons were like useless to these advanced technologies that came in, and they were ordered into silence after that.
If Eisenhower and our government were willing to keep this a secret, why couldn't they have just made a deal with the aliens and say, look, you can make yourself known, but we will not discuss that you have this particular technology or this particular technology, and that we ask that you refrain from sharing some of that because it could be to our detriment, but please share things that would be more positive. I only ask that is because, these aliens in the story are framed as friendly, so it seems like they would be amicable to that sort of, negotiation or agreement.
Possibly. They may have also decided we're not going to play favorites. If you don't want to play ball with us, we can go to talk to other nations And possibly this was what involved a second encounter at Holloman Air Force Base, February 55. They may have come back with the results of what they found in speaking to the Chinese or the Russians. Again, this is conjecture. I admit I don't have any clues on this, but people do ask this. Did these human-like beings talk to anyone else? It's a fascinating idea, but obviously it didn't have much of an effect. We continued life as normal in the 50s. Eisenhower served 2 full terms. He did have a heart attack later in 55, but I don't think it had anything to do with extraterrestrials. I was astounded to find that for many years, Eisenhower smoked up to 6 packs of cigarettes a day. I didn't know he was a smoker. He was a huge chain smoker. So no wonder he had a heart attack. Yeah. But he survived his full 8 years. And he had about 9 years, or about 8 more years, really, of retirement, in which he played a lot of golf in Palm Springs and met with dignitaries. And actually, some future presidents showed up at his door. And I put that into an intriguing final chapter in my book. He met with JFK, LBJ, of course, Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Gerald Ford. They all came out to Palm Springs, and, they all went on to become president or were president at the time. It's a fascinating subject that he seemed to attract America's best and brightest, or our leaders, in his retirement. He finally passed away in March of 1969, just 2 months after his former vice president, Nixon, became president. Mm-hmm. And apparently he had no deathbed confession.
If these aliens were to make an offer to you and they said, Paul, we could extend your life indefinitely. We can cure cancer. We can help you with all these diseases on this earth. Is it fair for you to say no when you think of your loved ones and other people who are suffering?
Well, it's a speculative question, but I'll go for the scenario and say, boy, that's tough. What are the drawbacks? I would ask, you're going to do all of this for me, and I get what? And I have to do what? Mm-hmm. Eisenhower was asked to get rid of his atomic weapons program. That was the drawback. He could not agree to that. I don't know what aliens would want from me to give me all of this good stuff under your scenario.
I have a question from Libertas in chat. Is the 1954 manual you referenced an MJ-12 document?
It could have been. It was certainly Army intelligence, and I believe MJ-12 was a real thing begun by President Truman and continued under Eisenhower to study recovered crashes and UFO sightings in general, try to keep the lid on things while we learned what was going on behind the scenes. It was very, very covert and isolated and top secret type stuff. And it's possible MJ-12 had something to do with that Army Manual 101, as you might look up and find on the internet. Certainly, again, you can go to majesticdocuments.com. It'll tell you plenty. And Ryan S. Wood is in charge of that, and he wrote an excellent book called Majestic Eyes Only. I highly recommend that. It's got the entire manual in there.
All right, in about 15 minutes, we're going to open up the listener open lines. So to call in the Paranormal Radio app hotline, that number is 855-472-5483 or 85-KGRA Live. You can call in and you can ask Paul your questions directly. Of course, we always want to hear from you. Paul, what happens next? So he's having a conversation with these aliens. How does he conclude it with them?
I believe it as politely as possible. He asked them to leave, and there might have been a return about a month later, according to one man who claimed to have been there, and that a man named Gerald Dwight. He was a metaphysical research at the Borderland Paranormal Science Laboratory, and he claimed in a letter, rather famous letter now, that he saw 3 circular craft, 2 elongated craft, human-like aliens interacting with the Air Force, everyone quite friendly, at Edwards Air Force Base. And he said, as I understand it, Eisenhower was here in February. and met with them, saw everything for himself, and he's pondering a broadcast to the nation for sometime in the middle of May. And I found out that's exactly when his Castle atomic bomb program finished. So it also made sense to prepare data and decide between February and May, do I really want to do this? Do I want to address the American people and talk to them about this landing? Or should I just keep it quiet? And he obviously opted not to give a broadcast. Apparently there were authorities in the military and in the government who asked Eisenhower, please don't mention this. Let's study it some more in private. I think the government had a policy, when in doubt, cover it up.
Was there any discussion about Roswell during this meeting?
Not to my knowledge, no.
So we would assume then Eisenhower would have known about Roswell before this occurred.
I would have guessed so. There's a memo at majesticdocuments.com that talks about Eisenhower giving a directive to allow a Catholic priest, to tour some New Mexico air bases at the time of the July 47 crash and recovery process. It's a very strange thing to allow this special access to a bishop, and it might be an indication that Eisenhower knew what was going on and he wanted a religious authority to give his opinion. People were very God-oriented and church-goers back then. Eisenhower was a very hardcore Christian. He was the first U.S. president to be baptized about a month into his office, and he asked that in God we trust be put on all of our currency. And he was a regular churchgoer and even went to church 2 days later in Palm Springs. So it also had to rattle him a bit in that he put faith in Jesus Christ and in God. And some people don't allow for much else besides that, or are afraid that people will jettison their belief in the church or the Bible in favor of worshiping aliens like gods, which was probably another factor for him to say, you're going to have to leave and don't show yourselves very often at all.
Yeah, I understand he's coming from what would appear to be an altruistic point of view, meaning he's concerned about others, but there's something selfish almost about that, isn't there?
I guess he had to speak for all America and maybe even all of humanity, and he did the best he could under the circumstances. He assessed everything.
Now,
I kind of wonder what was going on with the next president. JFK had a relationship with Eisenhower. They spoke over the phone. They met at Camp David. And yet, 1 year into JFK's administration, Kennedy flew all the way out to Palm Springs and met with Eisenhower for an hour or two at his golf course home, Eisenhower's home, in retirement out there. And then Kennedy had some gaps in his schedule. I checked his digitized presidential White House records. He did not play golf. What was Kennedy doing out in Palm Springs? Normally, when he flew to Los Angeles, he would stay with his brother-in-law, Peter Lawford, at a beach house, or the Kennedys were famous for staying at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles. What was Kennedy doing that he just had to see Eisenhower face-to-face and then go off for the next couple of days in which he was recorded here or there, and in other times there are blanks in his schedule. And there are rumors, and I put them in my book, that President Kennedy also saw possibly crashed materials, went to an Air Force base, saw some things. It's still very sketchy, but it's a fascinating follow-up to the Eisenhower tale that Kennedy was a young man who was apparently pretty curious himself. JFK Jr. said, one of the things I loved about my father was he was very curious and looked into things. And was this one of them? We can't ask JFK Jr. or JFK, unfortunately. We only can put the record together as best we can now from people who knew them.
It also begs the next logical question, which is, why has every following president followed suit with this choice by Eisenhower? Because Eisenhower at the time was doing the best that he thought was for the U.S. and for the world. But, you know, our presidents served 2 terms, and then that's it. They're 1 or 2. The next president has the choice, right, to come in and make their own decision. So is there something else set behind the scenes that's preventing from any concurrent president from revealing this information?
There's probably a briefing paper for every president after they win the election or just after they take office that says we are being visited. Keep your mouth shut about it. It might trigger a panic even to this day. It might even say that Eisenhower was the first to meet with some and ask them to stay aloof, to keep the lid on tight, because we're just not ready for it then or now. I'll add real quick, since, well, I guess we're up against it. Maybe in the next hour, I'll tell you about LBJ and Eisenhower.
Well, we have no break, so you can just go right ahead and tell us now.
Mm-hmm. After the Kennedy assassination, Eisenhower went to the funeral and met with LBJ in the Oval Office. And yet, within a few days of taking office, President Johnson let slip to the press, I've got to go out and see President Eisenhower face-to-face in Palm Springs. And the press, in an article I read, noted that this was very unusual to tip off the media and the world that you're going to be doing this. It eventually happened in February. When I was doing my research for the Eisenhower encounter and some sort of treaty that was signed, I put in there like Greada Treaty, which is a rumored name for it. I don't know if that was the title itself. And one of the returns I got in the Google search engine said 10-year agreement. Well, I couldn't find anything more on this, and I don't know why 10-year agreement came up. But guess who went out to see Eisenhower on the exact 10-year anniversary of the encounter at Edwards Air Force Base? Johnson flew in and met with President Eisenhower around February 19th, 20th, 21st of 1964. And there were little gaps in LBJ's schedule where he could have gone off and done something. He was not a golfer. Why he had to go out and meet with Eisenhower face-to-face? What were they talking about? Why the exact anniversary of 10 years from any agreement? It's very suspicious. You have to admit that it almost can't be a coincidence.
With all of the leanings towards legitimizing the UFO phenomenon right now with ATIP, the UFO Task Force, and hopefully there'll be some expected news coming this month or very soon. If we can collectively as a society say, yes, indeed, these are craft that are not of the USA manufactured, and most likely they're off Earth. If as a society, if mainstream media really starts to click in, would that open the door for revealing this story about Eisenhower? Or can they keep those things separate? Can we say, yes, it looks like, beings are visiting us, we can't deny it any longer, and ignore that part of history?
It's a good question and quite valid. But if they're going to reveal little bits and pieces of what's happened within the past few years, release these Navy radar and visual contact and show some blurry little UFOs captured on tape and talk about, we have no explanation for this, it's still a bit of a leap to say we're going to unfurl the whole file and start with Truman and Eisenhower back in the 40s and 50s. And we're going to reveal that there was contact and communication. I think that might be, for a while now, a bridge too far to expect. Apparently, what disclosure we're getting is being done gradual, piecemeal, drip by drip. So it seems a little unlikely. I'd love to see the whole Eisenhower file opened up, and even half of it. I'll settle for a redacted, that reports that are declassified and tell you at least some things. Whether we will get the full story in my lifetime, I have no idea. I'm not particularly optimistic, but you never know. Another factor is someone hacking into, computer files, whether the government likes it or not. I don't know how to do that, but there's always the thought that some computer wizard can get into old Pentagon files or Edwards Air Force Base files or something of that nature, something that was given to Skunk Works over the years, and exposing that. I think that's how we got the Skinny Bob alien video. Is that the correct story of how that was hacked and leaked onto the internet?
I think so. I'm not sure. But do you believe the Skinny Bob video?
Boy, that's a tough one.
Because I'm not sure I can accept that.
Yeah.
I'm open, but it seems like that could have been staged.
Supposedly, the Russians have this grainy footage that was kept in KGB files of a bulbous-headed alien who seems to blink his eye and have a little head throb or pulsate, and he moves around with his arms, and he looks around, and boy, if this was CGI, it's amazing what they produced, and for what reason? How would you make any money off of this? Under the comment section in YouTube, when I looked at that video, someone said, I work with CGI every day. This is not CGI. He suspected the real thing. Of course, anyone can say anything on the internet, however, but it is a really spooky video. And if you haven't seen it, folks, I recommend you take a look. It apparently has an authentic KGB logo from the early 40s and an authentic grainy black and white film that they used in those days. And by golly, if this is the real thing from one race, one species, who knows what else is out there that could be either declassified or hacked into and exposed by someone with the smarts and the know-how to get in there.
I don't know. It is eerie. It is creepy watching this Skinny Bob video. But after looking at it, I kind of think it's maybe just extraordinary puppetry and animatronics or something. I'm not convinced it couldn't be pulled off. I agree with you. I don't think it's CGI. But with enough money, I think you could pull it off. The question is why? Right?
Yeah,
why spend so much money?
Instead of doing such a thing, what would be the payoff other than maybe come out a year later or even a month later and say, ha, we pulled this off.
Right.
You all fell for it. Well, it's been, about 10 years since that video is out, and no one has come forward to claim, we pulled this hoax on you, you fell for it. So that gives another thought that this might be real. Mm-hmm. The rest of the footage, with these tiny little creatures walking around, and they seem to have like sweaters or suits on. It's just all very strange. It's just a portion of the video. I sure would like to see the rest, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. But if somebody did make that video, I could see it as like the perfect job application for a special effects studio.
That's right.
You go in for your interview and you go, look, please don't share this with anybody, but this is how we did it. This is what we did. Will you hire me? Of course they're going to hire them.
Right on the spot. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to open up the Paranormal Radio app hotline. That number is 855-472-5483 or 85-KGRA. Live call in on the Paranormal Radio line, and you can talk to Paul Blake live tonight and ask your questions. This is a fascinating topic, Paul, and it seems like any area of ufology that you touch, it branches out. It connects to so many other aspects of the phenomena, and that includes our place in the universe. And for yourself, are you a religious person? Does it affect you and your worldview at all?
I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in God, but I don't believe that we are the only race. The universe, the cosmos are incredibly vast. You almost can't wrap your mind around the images you see, just like a small portion taken by a satellite camera in space of the universe, and NASA presents these images, and it's just a fraction. We're just like a little pinprick in a huge blanket of the cosmos, and I believe we're created by God, and you limit God when you say, well, there's only the human race, and that's it.
Yeah.
I don't think God had any limits, and I think there are other creatures that could have evolved on Earth-like planets, but that's just my opinion. Some of them could well be far less advanced in very crude stages or in caveman type situations, and other planets far more advanced, far more peaceful and loving and kind, and that they've mastered space travel and possibly doing so by wormholes or even reconstituting their atomic makeup from place to place, like teleporting, where you don't need long distance flight. And that might be the answer why some aliens can come here in the first place. It would be an incredibly long flight otherwise, wouldn't it?
Oh, it absolutely would, and I agree with you. It can't be a traditional means of travel. We have our first caller on the line, Ron from Minnesota. You're here with Paul Blake Smith.
Hey, Alan, and hello, Paul. And
hey, Ron.
For the phone call. Great show tonight, man. Thank you for this conversation. So now the question I had thought of is, if they talked to Eisenhower, he's the president, of course, wouldn't they have talked to all the presidents? Because I remember Reagan was talking about something, but he kept quiet, and of course he's dead. Bush Sr., right? I think he's dead. Bush Jr., I think he's still alive, but he hasn't said anything, but he knows. Okay? Bill Clinton said he was going to say something, but he hasn't said anything yet. But now the interesting thing about this is that all of the presidents that said they were going to say something wound up in some kind of screwball story that got them into trouble, whether it was a personal life or something like that got into trouble. So do you think that they derail them in their credibility so that when they do come out and say something, that they're not going to be believed when they do tell the truth about the UFOs?
My best guess would be that presidents are informed of some things, but basically it's on a need-to-know basis. They generally are asked to keep their mouth shut, and they do. But let's go to a fascinating story. I'm sure you've heard it, that Steven Spielberg premiered his film E.T. the Extraterrestrial for President Reagan and his wife, some astronauts and members of his cabinet in the White House. And when the film was through, Reagan looked visibly moved, and he said, "You don't know how real this movie is." Spielberg kept his mouth shut about that leaked story for many years. Just a few years ago, he revealed the story is true. Reagan did say this, and he was not smiling. So that gives you an example that Reagan probably knew a great deal. I don't know if he ever met an extraterrestrial, a human type, in person. I have no evidence of that whatsoever, but I think that's a slice of the pie that he was told some things. Linda Moulton Howe's got some excellent work on a meeting at Camp David Reagan went through with William Casey, the head of the CIA, and they briefed him with a special agent on who knew about alien affairs. And if you can look that up, maybe on her wonderful earthfiles.com, you'll find out some fascinating stories there.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for your hard work. And Alan, keep up the great shows. And I'll call you again next time.
All right. Thanks, Ron. I appreciate it. Thanks for calling in, as always.
Have a good night.
All right.
And
good night,
thank
brother.
Ron for calling. And in my apartment building just down the hall, I have a friend named Ron who's from Minnesota.
Oh, really?
A coincidence.
It's not the same Ron?
Is this Ron from down the hall? But apparently not.
All right. So, that does... Oftentimes, people say that Steven Spielberg knew about... He had government contacts regarding extraterrestrial contact. And that story tells me that he didn't know, and that then Ronald Reagan was, in a sense, revealing it to him. What's your take? Do you think that Spielberg was working for the government to disseminate information about aliens to get us accustomed to this idea?
Right. I put a little bit of this in my book. Spielberg always researches his subjects very carefully, like AI, artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. He researched close encounters of the third kind back in the late 70s. He even spoke to Alan Hynek and Dr. Jacques Vallée and got real-life UFO stories and how they seem to knock out car engines and power plants and such with the clashing technology, which you see in the movie. But what is that movie about in the late 70s? It's about the United States Air Force in communication with extraterrestrials that eventually land at a remote desert Air Force base and are met by Air Force officials, and they're friendly. Where do you think Stephen got that idea? It's awfully similar to the Eisenhower encounter, and I don't think he was allowed to say certain things at the time, but I'm very, very suspicious that he knows the story and was allowed to say only certain things and show this fictional movie with quite possibly the non-fictional Eisenhower encounter as the outline.
Could it have been that rather than an official leaking of that story, that someone just, said to Steven Spielberg, "Hey, I got a story to tell you. This is what I experienced, or this is what I know." And it wasn't, in fact, the government itself, but just an individual, because that happens, right? I mean, people run in circles and they share a story with someone.
Remember, I told you for the 1982 Derry Matera written article for the Inquirer, he spoke to Dr. J. Allen Hynek and about the Eisenhower encounter at Edwards Air Force Base. Mm-hmm. So who did Steven Spielberg consult with for Close Encounters of 1977, 5 years before? Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who worked for the government for a while before he realized Project Blue Book was just a cover story, a scam, to dismiss all UFO sightings, and he started to research on his own. So that could have been a source that provided Mr. Spielberg with some data. I think Steven made a wonderful film. He's a wonderful man. He is married to Kate Capshaw, who is from my neck of the woods. She's from a small town called Chaffee, Missouri. I'm from Cape Girardeau, which is about 10 miles away. And in between those two small towns was the apparent crash landing site of the Cape Girardeau UFO story from 1941. I'm suspicious Kate Capshaw and her daughter, who's a famous actress on television, Jessica Capshaw, also knows the story from legend around town in Cape and Chaffee that an alien ship crash landed with 3 small bodies in late April of 1941. You would have to have been living under a rock in Chaffee not to have heard that tale, I'll bet. But you never know. Some things get talked about and other things are hushed up. That's what I found in my research about 1941.
Why wouldn't the aliens follow up with the other presidents themselves? If they didn't like Eisenhower's answer, why not skip a president maybe and come back? Was there anything in your research to indicate why they wouldn't try that?
They might have with LBJ. Linda Moulton Howe has an interesting interview with Dr. Edward Moraine, who worked out of, I believe, Edwards Air Force Base. In 1964, he said there was a contact event then. He didn't give an exact date, but we know LBJ was there. Eisenhower was there. It was the 10-year anniversary. We can put pieces together, but it's still not a solid enough foundation to say, absolutely, this happened for sure. But we've got some clues. And there's another tale I can tell you really quick. On the 19th anniversary exactly of the Eisenhower encounter, Jackie Gleason met up with President Richard Nixon, Eisenhower's former vice president, February 19th, 1973, at an Air Force base surrounded by guards. And they went to look at some crashed alien spacecraft. According to Gleason's wife, who said Jackie came home and talked about it, he was ashen, he was shaken. He said, I've just seen the bodies of alien spaceships. It happened to be on the exact 19th anniversary at an Air Force base. Is this a coincidence? Well, I put that in my Eisenhower book, and I also have a revised edition, updated, of Mo 41, The Bombshell Before Roswell, and I put a special chapter on the Jackie Gleason, Richard Nixon encounter in the back of that book. So it's something you might want to check out and look into. If you get a chance while perusing Amazon.com, there's 2 very thought-provoking, information-crammed books. I hate to blow my own horn, but, that's a little bit why I'm here.
Yes, blow away. That is quite fine, Paul. So do you think that we'll ever get it? Do you think we'll actually ever get disclosure?
Full, complete disclosure seems very unlikely.
And so how do we get that if it's not going to be given?
There's an actual extraterrestrial event that happens and the government here can't control it. And then they're going to have to admit, yes, we are being visited and we've kept this under wraps from you. But this one got out of hand. And I don't know if that will ever happen, but they may be forced into it someday if the aliens step forward without permission from the government and hopefully don't trigger a panic. I still find that unlikely, but possible.
What's your next step? You've done all this research. You seem to be convinced that this did happen. What can you do from this point forward?
Well, I'll also point out that Chris Munch made this independent movie, The 11th Green. I urge everyone to check that out, too. He believes the story. He's heard it many times. I would like to see it fleshed out in a docuseries or a docudrama or a motion picture. It would be very exciting. It would be a little tough to recreate the 50s, but I'm sure Alan B. Smith and his crew will pony up the dough for a big budget movie. I know you're personally very wealthy, so that
thanks, Paul.
Yeah,
I'm gonna get so many emails. Hey, bud. Hey.
Well, you'll open the bank vault for that and get the ball rolling with publicity, I'm sure. But as for me, I've been writing, trying to put together the entire Richard Nixon UFO involvement in a new book that might be somewhat of a sequel to the Eisenhower encounter. And I hope to have that finished sometime next year. It's fascinating. Nixon was a very secretive fellow, but
that goes without saying.
As you point out earlier, all humans have their faults and foibles and in some manner mental illness, and Nixon had his own share. He was visiting a psychiatrist, Dr. Emmensnegger or something like that, and he had a little bit of a drinking problem and would pop off and say some things caught on the Oval Office tapes. And so there's not a smoking gun on that yet, but I'm reviewing all the sources I can. It's quite interesting, and Jackie Gleason really was his golfing friend, and the two of them were buddies in Miami and living not far from Homestead Air Force Base. So that's a terrific story on its own, too.
I have a question from Dean in the comment section on Facebook. The president's black book that gets passed to the next president, doesn't that have any reference to Roswell?
It certainly could. Obviously, I've not seen it, but it might be a key component. You know, we were talking about President Reagan viewing E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Mm-hmm. Shortly thereafter, he went to Edwards Air Force Base. And later in 1982, he went to Roswell and gave a speech before a crowd not far from the hangar where it's been alleged that the aliens' bodies were brought in for, storage and the debris. I mean, what are the odds that this is just a coincidence? You have to believe that he was probably briefed on the Roswell crash because he asked about it. And there may be an underlying story why, in that you may have heard, Alan, and your listeners, that Reagan apparently had his own UFO sighting from an airplane, I believe in 1974, while campaigning in the state of California. His pilot swears that the story is true, that he saw it too, and that Reagan, being a conservative, decided to keep his mouth shut.
Well, I don't think people would have judged him if he said something once he was already in second term. I wish he would have shared that. Carter obviously, shared his experience. Clinton was clearly interested in learning more about Roswell, and I think that was more of a directive, a suggestion by I forget which Rockefeller. Right, it's the name is slipping me right now. That if there's one case that they should focus on trying to get information about, it would be Roswell. And they tried and apparently failed. But, maybe they didn't fail. Maybe he was told, look, this is why you can't do this. I think that eventually you can only hide something for so long, including technology. And eventually it's going to come out one way or another. And I guess the hope here is that we will be in a better state of mind collectively as a species to be able to handle this. I mean, that seems kind of like a pipe dream to me.
We're more braced up for it today through popular culture. My Favorite Martian, Mork and Mindy, E.T. the movie, Close Encounters. There's E.T. Science fiction programming on almost like 24/7 now. And so many popular movies with aliens, some of them very hostile and ugly, unfortunately. But we're far more ready mentally to accept this fact than 1954 or when the Cape Girardeau crash happened in 1941. It would have been something totally off the wall for most people who thought nothing of sci-fi back in the 40s and very little in the 50s. But let's take the case of Jimmy Carter, who saw a UFO in the sky of Leary, Georgia in January of 69. In 73, he filed a report and talked about how it turned colors and moved around in the sky and was not the moon. It was not a star. And he said during his 76 campaign, if I'm elected, I'm going to look into this because I've seen a UFO too. And of course, we know he clammed up real quick.
Exactly.
He had nothing to say. And after he left office, he sort of poo-pooed the whole thing and said, well, I don't know what I saw. But he talked openly back in the 70s. Before he took office, I definitely saw a UFO moving around in the sky. And there were other eyewitnesses at the time. I put that in my book, and it just gives you another example of the presidents are told, please keep your mouth shut.
Well, and that's the thing is, was he scared by the truth of what these aliens are, or did someone want him to be afraid for his life and not share this information?
Right. We won't know, but he's still alive, and he could tell us, but he won't. It gives you another example, like Barack Obama on the Stephen Colbert show just the other night. Colbert asked him point blank, and Obama said, I can't give you an answer for reasons of security or something close to that. He can't talk about it, but what does that tell you? He didn't dismiss it as a bunch of crackpot nonsense. If there was nothing to it, you would probably just dismiss it right out of hand, right up front. But he did not. And also, Presidents Clinton and Bush had been on Jimmy Kimmel Live talking about this, and they give the same answer, something flippant and chuckle, and they won't tell you what the answer is. So I think that, in a sense, does give us an answer.
Yes, we've not yet, and this happened to Obama twice, and all these presidents, we've not yet gotten an answer that says, I, so-and-so, promise you, American people, we have not and never have been visited. That's not the answer they give. It's always, they're always walking around that answer or making, some funny quip and then hoping to kind of just, roll through the questioning. Yeah.
Right.
So that is telling. Silence is loud.
Gerald Ford was a congressman in the 60s, and he asked the congressional leaders to open up a UFO investigation, that there were strange sightings in Michigan, his home state, and it was dismissed, I think, by even Hynek at the time as swamp gas. And that's when Hynek, I think, got fed up. Either someone issued that silly answer, and it was so flippant that he got fed up and quit Project Blue Book. But Ford wanted all the answers to UFOs, and he clammed up pretty quick when he became president, too. And he also retired to Palm Springs to a golf course, and he was pretty fair friends with Dwight Eisenhower as well, I might add.
Yeah. When you watch the video of Hynek in Michigan responding to the swamp gas thing, he was really trying to frame it like, I'm not saying this is the answer. We're just entertaining all these different possibilities, but it just, the media blew it up even bigger. And I think, the governor Ford at the time took offense to it. But when he watched the video, Hynek really wasn't flippant at all. He was just listing a number of characteristics that could explain a sighting. And I kind of feel like it got out of control, unfortunately, for him.
That's probably true. The media can help UFO cases at times, and other times they just seem to make a muddled mess out of things and get things wrong. Still, you see some cynical news people on TV almost smirking about UFO reports. Not all, but some. And there's just like a closed-minded approach that that's crazy town, or you're seeing things, or you just want attention. You're a liar or something like that. And that's another factor that we all have to fight in trying to get truth out to people. I hope they read my book and do their own thinking, do their own research, and ponder all the facts that I present about Eisenhower and other presidents and what could have been going on behind the scenes. It's all very exciting. I think you'll find it a very entertaining read. It's not full of far-out wacky theories. I use facts whenever possible.
Well, as far as far out wacky theories, I have to ask you, flip the switch here a little bit. Since you do believe or entertain the idea of extraterrestrials visiting a president of ours here on planet Earth, that they're around, do you also accept any idea presented to you in regard to ghosts or cryptids or anything of these other paranormal aspects?
Believe it or not, I have very little interest in those things. I listen sometimes to people's stories, but at some point they're so unprovable. A ghost, they might have some shaky video or they heard something on audio, and it could be explainable or it could not. But mostly I keep my head down in my research on what I'm writing about, and I don't stray too far afield from these real-life presidential UFO tales from like 1941 or 1954. I think Franklin Roosevelt may have known the score, and there's some documents where he mentioned the Non-Terrestrial Science and Technology Committee that he formed. Well, why would you do such a thing? He talked about these celestial wonders that come to us. I'm convinced that was the Cape Girardeau crash. I think there is a big story there that's been hushed up from the start. It didn't begin with Eisenhower or Truman. I believe it began with Roosevelt to keep it all quiet. And that policy is going on today, and who knows, maybe it's for the best.
That is the theme of the night, to keep it all quiet. One last question I'm going to ask, if you can squeeze in 30-second response. This is from William Shayon. Was John Lennon killed because he saw a UFO?
He did see a UFO and reported it in 1974. He was quite serious. I've got some of that in my latest book. But he was just killed by a crazy fan who was psychotic and wanted fame for himself. It's very sad. I was a big fan, and I cried December 8th, 1980, and I might do so again in a few days on the 40th anniversary. It's just so horribly tragic. We miss him very much.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Paul, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really, really appreciate it. It was a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it very much, and I hope you enjoy the book.
Yes. For all of you out there, go check out the book. It is called President Eisenhower's Close Encounters by Paul Blake Smith. And these are the accounts that we can really sink our teeth into. Anything historical, that gives us something to work with. We can look for paper trails. We can ask for FOIA requests. And we can hopefully get statements from eyewitnesses or secondary statements like Nixon's wife, for instance. So we will continue on exploring the unknown here on Paranormal Now, broadcasting live Tuesdays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KGRA Radio. And please check out the new website, kgradb.com. Your official contact for the best in alternative talk radio. And again, to find out more and follow me, go to Twitter at paranormal_now or on Instagram at paranormalnow. Special thanks to Head of Operations Eric Brigger, producer Bill Skywatcher. Until next time, everyone, be well and live in the mystery.